In today's video, we're going to take a look at all the things that players have to do before turn 1 of Adeptus Titanicus. The rulebook has bits and pieces of this all over the place, and it can be a bit of a nightmare to try and piece it all together. So I've put together a kind of checklist that looks at all of the things you need to do prior to turn 1. The best place to start would probably be with setting up your game board or battlefield. Titanicus is typically played on a 4-foot by 4-foot game board, and when you're actually deploying the terrain, you can do this a couple of ways. You and your opponent can alternate throwing down individual pieces of terrain. You can roll dice for where terrain pieces go. One of you can set it up and the other one can pick a side, or one of my favorite ways of doing this is I actually like to get somebody who isn't even playing the game set up the game board. When it comes to the type of terrain that you use, you want to make sure you have a variety of heights and sizes. Like, you want to make sure there's a lot of terrain out there that can block or obscure warhounds, reavers, and warlords. As long as you have a nice mix of all of those, then your game should play out pretty interesting. Once you've actually got your game board set up, it's important at this point that you and your opponent have a conversation about what counts as difficult, dangerous, or deadly terrain, if any of that applies. Now that you have your battlefield set up, you and your opponent will have to decide what game level you want to play at. In Titanicus, you have 3 that you can pick from. You have a low point skirmish, a midpoint confrontation, or a high point epic clash. Each of these give you a point range for list building, as well as let you know some other factors that'll apply. Now that you know your game level, you and your opponent have a points range that you can actually use to build your list or battle group. The number you get at the end of this will actually be called your battle rating. It's important to note for match play, your battle group has to contain at least 1 mana pool. This is also the point where you can pick what mana pool your battle group is based off of, as well as legion traits that you want to follow. If you want a full breakdown on list building, check out the channel's basic series and the 2 videos on list building. After your battle group's been put together and your points have been calculated, the rulebook says it's now time to select your Princeps Senioris. This is the overall commander of your mana pool or force. It's important to note that your Princeps Senioris has to be one of the titans within your battle group mana pool. So you wouldn't be able to make this an auxiliary titan if you picked one. But what this does is it gives that specific titan a bonus to their command checks, as well as a personal trait that you can pick, which we'll address later on. The next thing to do is to actually look at your underdog margin. This is kind of designed to give a player who would have been at a disadvantage a chance for some even footing and balance out your game. What you would do here is compare your battle group's battle rating or points to your opponent's battle rating, and then look at the chart shown below for the game level you're playing at and see if that difference matches the underdog margin. If your list is that many points below your opponent's, then you're considered the underdog. You gain a +1 to your strategy points, as well as a handy bonus when it comes to mission selection. Speaking of missions, it's now time for you and your opponent to figure out your objectives for the game. If the underdog margins don't apply to your match, which oftentimes this is the case, you would both secretly roll 2d6 die and then consult the chart for the match play objectives. In this case, I rolled a 4 and a 5, which means I get to choose between the mission Glory and Honor or Hold the Line. My opponent would then do the same thing, with both of us keeping that a secret, and we would reveal our choices at the exact same time. If one of us was the underdog, this is done a little differently. So the player who isn't the underdog or has the higher battle rating would roll their 2 die, select a mission, and tell their opponent which mission they've selected. The underdog would then roll 2 dice and pick their mission, revealing it to the opponent. The benefit here is your underdog gets to choose a mission already knowing what mission the opponent is going for. So they actually may have an objective advantage here, just to even out the game balance. The next 3 steps, steps 7, 8, and 9, can actually be done in any order you like. It'll probably change from game to game. But the important thing to remember is that you do these 3 steps after you've selected your mission and before you deploy your Titans. This is important because all 3 of these things may change depending on the game and mission you're playing, and you want that flexibility to tweak and change things to help you accomplish whatever your main objective is. To start things off though, we'll look at stratagems. This lets you spend your strategy points on things like battlefield assets, certain game tricks and tactics, or even a bonus objective if you think you're going to have a hard time accomplishing the main one you're playing for. It's important to note though, you get your strategy points based on the game level, and if the underdog margins apply, then the underdog actually gets 1 more point than their opponent. Remember that Princeps Senioris that we designated earlier in the checklist? Well, now's a good time to go back to your battle group commander and actually give them a personal trait. This gives them a unique ability, something specific to them that you can use on the battlefield. Now, you can design your list around specific personal traits, nothing wrong with that, but it's good to readdress it at this point and possibly change it, giving you some more flexibility to actually accomplish the specific mission objective that you have for this game. When it comes to personal traits, you've got really 2 choices. You can either choose the main one in the rulebook, which gives you an option of I think 4 to 6, or you can go to any of the supplements and choose one from your Legion that you've decided to adopt the Legion rules from in your list building. The last thing you want to do before deployment is actually designate your squadrons. This is where you choose which available models will combine into what size and amount of squadrons. It's important you do this before deployment because you actually deploy individual squadrons at once in one activation rather than doing the alternate activations with your opponent where you place 1 Titan, they place 1 Titan. You're actually going to be placing multiple Titans down at once. Now that we've got our battle groups all figured out and our stratagems purchased, it's finally time to start looking at deploying our forces. Titanicus has 4 different kinds of deployments that you can use. Some of them are really quick, some of them actually take quite a while. How this works though is the player with the lowest battle rating or lowest point list rolls a d6. You then consult a chart in the match play section of the rulebook, and depending on the number you roll, that'll tell you which deployment method you're using. Say I had the lower battle rating and I rolled a 4. The chart would tell us that we're going to deploy using the close quarters method. It's pretty important that you read the paragraphs next to each deployment type, because it'll actually outline how you roll off for who deploys first, and more importantly, how you roll off for determining who the first player is or who has the initiative in turn 1 of the game. Regardless of which deployment method you're using, you actually have to deploy your battlefield assets immediately before you deploy your first Titan or activation. This kind of happens at the same time. So if it was my turn to activate a Titan for deployment, and I did purchase battlefield assets, I would deploy all of my battlefield assets wholly within my deployment zone, then throw down a Titan, and then it would be my opponent's turn to do their first deployment activation. Depending on which deployment you're using, you just alternate back and forth or keep going from there. That's everything for today's topic. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, or if you're interested in more Titanicus content and how to play, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you on the next one.